All right, fellas, welcome to our GR Corolla side chat with Grant from Annex Suspension. He's flown into town here to 3D scan our GR Corolla and design a bespoke coilover setup for this car. We thought it's a good opportunity to sit down and have a chat with him about general suspension tech, not just for the GR Corolla, but for any of you who are out there thinking about what should I put on my car and what spring rate should I run? What does a damper do? Well, why do I care if it's adjustable or not? What parts of the dampers matter in terms of performance? So we're just gonna have a chat about all this stuff. But why don't we start off with the GR Corolla, since that's why you're here now, and what sort of challenges this car has presented for you?
Well, we spent a lot of resources getting something built up for the GR specifically. And that's because on this platform, we really wanted to set it up with an inverted monotube,
right?
Which is a new product and program for us. But we just felt like it'd be beneficial for cars like this, like the GR Corolla and others moving forward.
Okay.
And I can talk a little bit about inverted now if you'd like.
Yeah, please do. Like, what's the reason to go inverted? What are the advantages or disadvantages of it?
So, as you guys may know, normally on a front strut, you might have a, let's say a 20 millimeter or 22 millimeter rod, which is going into a tube, and that's your damper, but it's also a loaded piece of the suspension, right?
Right.
Because on a strut, you've got your hub, and then you've got your top hat, and all that cornering load is going onto that strut, and it's putting side loading onto those bushings and the rod itself, right? Whereas like on a car like an S2000, that has double A-arms, you're not going to have that. The double A-arms are actually controlling that loading.
They take the load, the damper doesn't take the load.
Yeah. So the shock needs to be stiff, but also while it's under load, you've got additional friction from deflection and stuff. So So what we have been kind of going after is, as we work with more and more racers, and the tire compounds, the grips are getting like insane these days, right? Like it's just amazing how much the tire tech has changed.
Tires are now very, very sticky.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
We are looking to see what we can do to increase the stiffness. So literally, the drivers you're going to feel like better stiffness and response on track versus like the older architecture.
Sure.
So inverted is something we've been interested in a long time. For us, it's just we wanted to make sure we did a good job with it. So
how does inverted address the stiffness issue?
That's a great question, yeah. So on this particular R&D kit, we have left the dust boot off.
Yep.
And actually, we're still designing some dust boots for production. But you can see here that the shaft is quite large here, right?
It's massive, yeah.
And so inverted literally means it's an upside down shock. So whereas normally this threaded portion would be your shock body, and then you have a rod going up to here, right?
Yeah.
And as you're cornering, all that load is going onto the head seal and the bushing surface here. So what inverted does is basically this chrome area is the shock absorber itself. So all of your oil and your nitrogen is in this part of the shock.
Interesting.
And then you've got your small rod going down to the bottom.
Okay.
You can probably see there's like an adjuster down there as well.
Right.
So all that now what we're able to do is we're able to use two very large bushing surfaces here and here to allow it to take a lot more lateral load. And when I mean bushing, it's really like a metallic bearing surface. It's not like a piece of rubber.
Oh, okay.
So and they're quite wide, and they're in 2 points. So you have a much larger area where you can take that lateral load.
Spread out the load over those. Okay.
So it's a strength thing, but also it's going to reduce friction and wear while under extreme use. The other thing we have to combat is, this architecture is great, but it's definitely more complicated to put together.
Okay.
And there's also inherently more friction than a normal shock, just in like its normal vertical state, like without side loading.
Okay.
So what we've spent a lot of time focusing on is making sure that the damper inside is very, very low friction, as well as these seals, yet has proper seals to keep dust and grime out.
Sure.
So we're trying to balance that, and it's been quite a project.
I bet it's interesting to go down a new road, isn't it? And
yeah.
Are you discovering that you're needing to like internally shim them differently or use different valving?
No, absolutely.
It's a different approach to a normal shock.
Yeah, and then so everything I've said sounds great, right?
Yeah.
But there is a downside to going to inverted monotube. Since this tube has to fit in what was the old tube, inherently this is a smaller shock, right?
Right.
So there is a smaller piston inside.
Okay.
In our case, this is a double digressive piston. We're kind of still experimenting with that, and hopefully at the end of this test, you guys like it. But there can be some ride and handling trade-offs with double digressive.
Okay.
But at any rate, it's a smaller piston, so we did have to carefully pick the valving and take a look at the high speed flow rates on the dyno and stuff like that. So experimental, but we really love optimizing shock. So
being smaller, you've got less fluid in there. Is the fluid therefore going to get hotter faster? Are you seeing is there a performance trade-off there, or is there enough fluid in the system regardless? It's not really a big problem.
It's not so much a temperature. It's more like a flow and valving surface area consideration. So basically, when you have a larger piston, you're able to have a more responsive shock because there's more surface area.
Okay.
So you don't have to put so much of the force requirements onto the shims themselves if they're larger. But yeah, basically a larger piston is going to have a more responsive shock.
Interesting. I'm just thinking about your piston design too. Like with a larger piston, you've got more engineering possibilities in terms of how flow goes through it.
Yeah,
you've got more material to work with in a sense.
Yeah, so that's right. So we have to be very careful with the port sizes on these smaller pistons. So,
right, port sizes. These are the words I was looking for. I've seen pictures, but I've never built a shock. So work with me here. Work with me, people. And
it's funny. Like people in the damper industry, they're just essentially we're just forcing oil through a hole.
Yeah.
So that's really what a damper is. But the way that's
and turning that knob is affecting that as well, right?
Yeah.
It's funny. People inherently, I think, understand, what a spring does. It's a pretty simple device, but a shock is actually a pretty complicated device.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
At least I find them challenging to wrap my head around. Although when you take them apart, there isn't a lot of moving parts inside.
Yeah.
But I assume when you're specking out your coilovers or your shocks in particular, you're having to choose your internals very carefully because that's where the performance really comes from in these things.
Yeah. So as we get better and better in this, we're starting to find the things that really separate extremely high performance shocks from kind of more basic ones.
Yeah.
And so in the old days, we were just trying to make sure that the valving forces felt good and that the shapes, the curves were good, right? And to that degree, I think we were successful. But now that we have that down, we're looking at things like low friction seals, durability, also how the fluid is behaving under certain conditions as well. And also for this example that we built for you, there's actually a temperature compensating needle that we've developed. So,
oh wow!
So there's actually I guess there's a lot to unpack there, but the needle is what controls your damping, right?
Yes.
But we have this set up so that as the oil temperature increases on track, the needle actually will change its position in its metering hole. And so what that means is that you'll have more consistent damping at a wider variety of temperatures.
Wow, that's amazing.
So those are some of the smaller incremental things that we've been focusing on.
I've never even heard of this before. It's I'm trying to wrap my brain around that one. But so when you're designing these, obviously you're not tied to any one supply chain or any one supplier. You can really pick and choose what you want because you are building these to your own specifications and your customers' needs. So where are you focused in terms of where do you spend your money when you're building out your dream damper? What do you focus on?
I'm glad you asked because a lot of people to this day still assume that we're just getting stuff from Asia and just rebadging and sending it out. But we're very transparent about this. So what we do is we pick and choose catalog items that are available for other companies to buy. So for example, this bracket is not something that we design in-house. We have some brackets that we design in-house, but we would rather spend our time on the damper and valving tech because for us, we're damper guys, and we know that dampers are going to make a huge difference in how the car drives.
Right.
So where we can, we will buy off-the-shelf items, and if the off-the-shelf items aren't good enough, we will design our own. So we kind of pick and choose when we do that.
Okay.
But the internals is where we spend all our time and energy. So there's a lot of the internal parts that we design and manufacture and test and do all this stuff in-house. So we've got engineers on team. We've got our own shock dynos. So we do a lot of damper development in-house.
And that's where the performance is going to come from. Obviously, the body coming from Taiwan or China, who cares as long as it meets your specifications and is high enough quality that you're not breaking them.
Yeah, we want to make sure there's good corrosion resistance. We want to make sure things are very durable and safe. And when they make that criteria, and then we're happy with it. And we move on to just the damper tech.
Right. So what about the concept of your customers send you a spec sheet?
Yeah.
This is my car. How are you helping them choose spring rates? Because I get a lot of emails and messages from you guys about what spring rate should I put on my car? And that's not an easy question for me to answer. And I know you're very math based and you have a way of like helping people spec out springs. Can you kind of explain that process a bit?
Yeah. So basically, when we started this company, many years back, we went from the ground up. So what that means is that we wanted to understand the physics of the vehicle first, so that we could understand what to build, and then do a good job building dampers. So it turns out that once we have our infrastructure in place, now when a customer comes and tells us like, hey, I have a EK Civic, for example, the curb weights are this, my control arms are this, I'm using this much downforce, these are the tires I'm using. Well, we actually we have a form on our website called the spring rate consultation, although it's really a suspension consultation because it involves the valving as well, as you know.
Yeah.
But we will ask customers to give us that information, and then we will calculate the required frequencies for us to build. And a frequency essentially how stiff is a car relative to another car, because as you guys know, if we just put an 8K spring on this car with a strut, if you take that 8K spring and put on an ST1000 with a high amount of leverage or motion ratio, it's going to be incredibly soft.
Right.
So you definitely cannot compare spring rates across chassis. It does not work that way. And hopefully, it's 2023. Hopefully people understand this now.
Yeah, the effect the spring has at the wheel differs based on the suspension geometry, the design of the suspension.
I just remember
I think most people kind of grasp that at a broad level.
Yeah.
But it's a difficult question to ask because there's so many variables involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not only the car's design, but the tire they're running, the aero they're running,
and the weight too.
The weight, what tracks are they running at?
Yeah, I mean, we might have this beautiful track setup for a certain car, but then if someone does an engine swap or if they've massively reduced the weight, it's a completely different math situation. And for us, it doesn't mean just changing the spring rates. We're literally changing the compression and the rebound valving to match too.
That's a great point, because a lot of people fixate on spring rate, but the performance that you're getting out of this package is more determined by the damper than it is the spring. I think that's fair to say.
Both are important, but let's put it this way: like, you can have a car with not quite the right springs still drive very well if the dampers are done well.
Exactly.
The other way around is not true, right?
Yes.
So if you have really poor dampers but the perfect spring rates, it's going to be horrible.
It's going to be horrible. And I've experienced that on both sides. I've raced on $10,000 dampers where I could run any spring on it and I was happy. And I've raced on $1,500 dampers where it didn't matter what spring rate I had on, the car was terrible. It was bottoming out. It was on the bump stops all the time. It couldn't control the spring no matter what the rate was.
And we studied the legends. There's a lot of really well-known companies out there that just do amazing things with dampers, and it's incredible. You can run such high spring rates on those dampers and still have like a good ride quality stuff, great performance and stuff. And so for us, that's our goal as we improve our tech, is to allow people to get to that higher and higher level. And you've experienced a little bit of that with sport comfort valving, because that's something along those lines of where we're headed.
Yeah, really impressed how the FD2 is riding on these rough streets here with that damping as well. At the track, we can turn the dampers up and it has really good body control, really good motion control. And the Type R, though it doesn't have your sport comfort valving, I have to say, still blows me away how well that rides. And I can go to the racetrack and smash curbs super hard in that car, and it just absorbs them. It really impressed me how dynamic, or I don't know, dynamic's not right, but how flexible they are in terms of the ways that you can use that car and feel like it's still a great street car, but man, it's so good around the racetrack. So in terms of price point, the aftermarket coilover marketplace is a really interesting one. There's stuff like Raceland at the $400 price point, which is I think about as cheap as you can go, and I'm pretty sure you get what you pay for. I've never actually tried a set of those, but I certainly have seen them on acquaintances' cars. I wouldn't call them friends. My friends don't buy that, but you can see they ride absolutely terribly. So what exactly do you think differentiates the market in terms of the low-end stuff versus the high-end stuff? Can you kind of fill us in on where you think these companies are spending their money and where customers should be spending their money?
That's a great point, right? Because our setups start at 4 times or 3 times the cost of those Racelands that you mentioned, right? So that's a great question. So typically these mass-produced, out of the box coilover systems, the areas that you're gonna find wanting are it could be anywhere from a safety issue. There could be some things that are just inherently
I'm seeing cracks along here.
I don't know much about Raceland, so I'm not trying to say that there's an issue there.
No, we're not picking them out. Just in general,
those are some of the things that we look out for. Is first of all, is it physically safe? Because our people's safety on the road is a number one concern, right?
Yeah.
So is it safe? The other thing is it's also just the materials and seals that are used. one from a ride quality and performance perspective, but two also just from a longevity perspective.
Yeah.
Because there's high pressure oil in these tubes. That high pressure oil, especially when the shock is stroking, that oil does not want to stay there. It wants to get the hell out of the shock, right? So we need to do everything that we can to keep that oil contained inside this monotube shock. So if you've got a seal, like let's say you've got a shaft that is just quickly turned out, it's not polished, and you've got seals that are kind of like quickly made and they're just kind of rough, you're going to have issues with oil staying in the shock because you don't have these great surfaces, right? And as you can imagine, if you guys ever polish something, it takes ages to make something super smooth, right? So there's a lot of expense that goes into that part. So that's kind of like the mechanical side of it. And then on the other hand, then you've got like the valving and the piston designs. So just out of curiosity, we've thrown some cheap shocks on our dyno and we just kind of see what's going on. And we see all kinds of crazy things. Like we'll see dampers for like an old school Toyota Corolla making like 1,000 pounds of rebound at 10 inches per second, which I know maybe you don't have anything to gauge that with, but that might be like triple or quadruple the amount of rebound that we would use in that scenario. And so like
it creates like a pogo effect, like
it's more like the car is just completely stuck to the road and does not want to let go, but in a bad way. So like if you hit a bump, it's just that's where you will see drivers just flying out of their seats and stuff. It's a combination of the spring rates that are chosen willy-nilly, as well as just the dampers just being like rock hard solid.
Interesting. So
I mean like the valving itself might be all over the place, but also a big part of the kind of differences in what we do is like we're spending a ton of time on the actual like piston design and the quality of the materials that are going on inside the shock. So to get a shock to be consistent from side to side or to match our targets, it's quite difficult. So for example, if we take an out of the box like inexpensive coiler system, or sometimes even like mass produced but well-known shock companies, will dyno their shocks, there could be as much as like 20 or 30% variation.
That much?
On the dyno, and then I've also been privy to spec sheets from manufacturers that will say like, oh, we're okay with this much variation because it's very, very difficult to make shocks that match at scale, right? And you talk to like actual race shock builders, or at least I have. And I'm like, hey, we've had trouble getting shocks to match. Like, what do you guys do? And like, it's a lot of labor to make sure that if you want a damper to be matching really well, there's a lot of time spent just getting shocks, to like rebuilding the shocks, tweaking things just to get them to match. That's one part of it. But then, we don't want to spend so much time just rebuilding shocks over and over again. So what we do is we design really, really precise internal parts to make sure that everything goes together exactly the same on every single shock, except for the piston and the shims that are chosen. So by having really, really precise parts inside, you're able to make dampers that are repeatable and predictable.
And you're choosing your pistons and shims obviously based on the spring rates and the customer's needs and all that kind of stuff. And
that's assuming all that is done. But just even after I spec that, like it can still be a challenge just to make the shocks match themselves until we started developing like very precise internal parts that build it all together.
Here's a question for you about the adjustability of the dampers. I mean, I've tried probably, 10 or 15 different brands of dampers over the years, and some of them have 24 positions, but you don't feel any difference unless you make like a 5-click change at a time, sort of. Some of them might only have 8 positions, but each one is a distinctive change. So I'm wondering what your sort of philosophy is on that.
I mean, I have also experienced shocks where there might be like 40 positions of damping, and then you drive in and you're like, okay, well, actually only like 12 of these positions are usable. The top 3 are like way too tight. These are never usable. And then the bottom, the remaining, whatever it is, like that remaining chunk is just completely unusable. So that has to do with like how the needle and the bleed port are shaped and how they're tuned for the amount of adjustment range that you have. So in our case, we have 24 clicks of adjustment. Realistically, our drivers are going all the way up to 4 from full tight, down to about maybe 19 or 20 from full tight. So there's a little bit of deadband on there, but we want to make sure that every single click is usable. And frankly, this is actually more difficult for us to kind of explain to customers, because people that really don't know will come to us with like, hey, I like what you guys are about, but this company has like 50 clicks, and right, and
that's twice the clicks you have, bro.
No, seriously, right? So it's like it's just sometimes I start like, man, was that really
Instagram?
Was that really the right choice? Because like I'm trying to do the right thing, but it's making it harder for us.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But you will find that at the more motorsport tier, they're going to give you like 8 clicks, right?
Exactly.
Because they know,
but
the racers
really
know the racers don't want to spend time fiddling with settings that aren't going to help them, right?
Yeah.
So.
I'm trying to remember, was I at 20 clicks or 22 clicks, and does it even matter?
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, to hear that you say there is a little bit of a dead zone at each end, because in my experience, running any damper like at full stiff or full soft, it doesn't feel like it's working well. So I often like start in the middle, and I kind of tune out from there and try not to go too close to the extremes.
Right.
And I suppose that's probably true with most dampers.
Yeah. And generally, pretty much you never will run a shock at full tight. So like just don't even bother. If you're finding that you have to if you have to run a shock at full tight, that shock probably needs a revalve, because what that means is that there's way too little bleed.
Yeah.
And which means that the tire bleed is basically just allowing a little bit of oil to go past the shims. That's all that means. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that the tire is not going to be able to deal with the little nuances in the road, and you'll be skipping.
Right.
So definitely, if you have shocks you're running at full tight, there's probably something that could be optimized on that.
Okay.
And I'll be honest, like on this very early prototypes that we made for you, I screwed up on the bleed on the inverted. So I'm going to tell you right now that there's I think there's 20 clicks of adjustment on here. You're only going to be able to use 6 of them.
Right.
So we do need to go in and redesign the needle and change some other stuff.
Oh, interesting.
So,
okay.
But that is some of the behind the scenes things that we do that isn't really apparent to customers. But like, we're going to go and we're going to keep changing the needle shapes until we get something that's is what we would want to run ourselves.
Yeah, and to be clear, like we're adjusting rebound behavior with this.
It depends on.
It does change compression a little bit as well.
Yeah, it depends on the damper. Like sometimes we'll have check valves and stuff to separate those, but for the most part, if you have a single adjustable damper, it's primarily going to be on the rebound side.
Right.
And then the compression side is like you really need to work with a manufacturer that understands the compression valving to get the compliance and the grip that you're after.
Yes. And in my case, when I'm adjusting on a single adjustable, I'm doing it to try to adjust the balance of the car a bit at the racetrack. So if the car has a bit of push, I might soften the front or stiffen the rear to try to get it to rotate. I assume that's what your customers are doing with it as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, I will generally like run it a little bit softer on the street and turn it up a bit at the track to try to control motion a bit more.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. So for the single adjustable shocks, it's mostly you can do some attitude change with the rebound tuning, but it's gonna be mostly for changing for grip or for comfort. So what I mean by that is if you're driving on the street, obviously open it up, makes it more compliant.
Yeah.
If you're on a very grippy track that's smooth, you're gonna run it tighter. If you're on a track with bumpy surfaces or hasn't been paved in like 30 years, then you're gonna run it a little bit open just because
every racetrack in Canada.
I didn't want to say anything, but based on the stories you've told me, so like you probably are running your shocks a little bit more open than us in the States. But like we've got some pretty like aggressive tracks too, like Buttonwillow Raceway where we test at. That track is bumpy as shit. Where it's like
Laguna is like a pool table. It's so smooth now. We just repaved Laguna, I believe.
I haven't been there myself, but I heard the times are like 2 to 3 seconds faster per lap now. So
that's wild.
But yeah, I mean, there's even more that you can do with dampers. So that's why we're coming out with a double and triple adjustable setup. Which
are you?
I'd love to get you guys set up on later, but that's in development right now. But that's when it really comes to attitude change. It's really amazing what you can do additionally with low speed and high speed compression. Because it's wild. It's almost like you can almost dial it in like you've changed your sway bar just with a couple clicks. It's pretty gnarly. Yeah.
I ran triples on my Canadian touring car back in the day, and it was a blessing and a curse because it's very easy to get it wrong, and you can spend your whole weekend chasing it. But if you get it right, it is amazing how it can dial in the car's behavior. So, for the average user out there, I think you have to be a hardcore motorsports guy and really be willing to spend the time to learn how to use.
And the money
to use this tech, because it can be complicated and you can definitely chase your tail on it. I personally like the simplicity of a single adjustable, as long as it's damped well from the start and match well with the springs. I don't often need to do a lot with the dampers anyway.
Right.
So that's what I like about your product so much, is I can put them in the middle and it just feels good.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I gotta plug ourselves here, but like that is the value that we add. So like if you come to us with this car, or if it comes like gutted, later on, we will change the compression damping to make sure, and all the damping basically, to make sure it matches that. So all you need to worry about is just adjusting your single adjustment, but it's already tuned for the car.
Exactly.
And that's why doing our suspension consultation is so important.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like a catalog solution, a one-size-fits-all thing. You've really specifically set it for this car. So if you've done your job well, I should just put them in the middle and it's going to feel good, and then I can fine-tune from there. And so far, he's been doing it right, everybody. So in terms of SKUs, if I can use a salesy number there, because you guys are building bespoke systems for customer by customer for specific cars, you're not like catalog producting stuff, you don't have coverage of the entire marketplace. No. You focused on specific, like enthusiast cars more or less, right?
Enthusiast cars that we care about, but also there needs to be a business case,
Right. So right now you've obviously covered a lot of the like golden era Honda stuff, a lot of golden era Toyota stuff. You're in some BMW stuff as well.
Yeah.
He was just scanning a Mitsubishi at our shop recently, so that's a future product. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about how you're selecting what to build kits for?
Yeah, I mean, we have most of the most popular Japanese cars covered. So all the Hondas. We have the full range of Subarus. We have the later Evos that we got in the States. That would be the 9s as well as the 10s.
Right.
The reason I'm scanning the wagon is just to see what's different on the wagon, but also I just want to update our records and stuff for the Evo 9.
Sure.
And then we've got Zs, so G35s, 370Zs.
Don't straight pipe your Zs, boys.
Classic Toyotas. We've had BMWs in the catalog for a long time, but just people didn't know, and just now that's starting to, people are starting to like, oh wait, they make BMWs now, so there's that as well. And then as we've kind of matured as a company, we're starting to do more of the newer cars. So GR Corolla is great. We've been working on this for quite a while. We're gonna be looking at the A90 Supra coming up. Civic Type Rs, we like to do those as well.
Yeah, great idea.
So just these days, I think we'll actually have a Tesla offering
sweet.
a feature too.
That's a good idea.
So we're trying to get a little bit more mainstream. There's one application that people have always asked us for, the RSX and the EP3 Civic, that people know we have not touched for years, but that's actually top our list because that's one of the most requested applications from us.
Interesting.
Yeah.
TSX? Do you do TSX?
No, occasionally we'll get TSX, but not enough people are asking.
You're getting more requests for RSX EP3.
Yeah. And actually that's worth mentioning is like if you really want us to do an application, the best thing is to get some buddies together and show us that there's interest, because that's we really got to, we have to prioritize our time.
Yeah, if they can bring you 10 customers, then it might make sense.
Yeah, no, definitely.
To make an effort. Nothing for Alfa Romeo to match your hat yet?
Not yet. As you guys can tell, I'm a huge Alpha nut, but not enough Alfisti on the road, unfortunately.
All right. Well, I think we've taken up enough of Grant's time and your time too. But thank you so much for diving deep with us on it.
Appreciate it.
Really interesting to learn more about the process of making bespoke coilover systems. And if you guys want to know more, obviously jump onto annexsuspension.com. You can see a lot. You've got a great website with a lot of excellent technical information there about your process, so do check that out, and go to your YouTube channel as well, because you put out a video not too long ago really like explaining your backstory and why you got into this business. So jump over to, I assume it's just Annex Suspension on YouTube?
Yeah, that's right.
Where they find you. So we'll put a link in the description to that video and to his website. Thanks again, Grant.
Thank you so much.
Let's make coilovers for everything.
Let's do it.